Whoa. Boy, sit down.
Boost.
Oh man, that's old, man. Stop doing that.
Point Charlie.
Pissing me off with that, man.
Enemy.
The boost is being taken by the enemy.
Boy, where you going?
An agent
The
needs.
enemy will win this if you don't capture it.
Okay, so all right, so you get more DPS from using the hollow point rounds, right? But you get a stronger bleed when you just hit them with the Ridgeway's Pride bleed, because you have the hollow point bleed, you have the Ridgeway's Pride bleed. So this is the one without hollow points. The bleed is more effective. And then let's say I switch to this is crazy. Let's say I switch to the hollow points, right? Hit with that. The bleed, you see how the bleed is, you know, less effective as far as duration. Yeah. But you get more DPS with the hollow points. So either way you're winning, man. You either get more DPS, less bleed, or less DPS, more bleed. Perfect balance, man.
Alright, try this one.
Detected.
Obviously, I'm not gonna be able to hurt you, dude. You're trolling me now. And this, folks, is how you counter.
Oh no, man.
But I mean, you know, this is where you rely on DPS. Yes. Oh, you gotta be shifty, man. You know, you gotta be shifty.
Actually, I'm starting to like this one too, with Neuron.
Hey, what's up everybody? Identity here, and today I got something really special for you. Now, you know I love bleed builds, and I know you love them too, but this one is better than any I've made before. And it's part one of a two-part series that I've been working on specifically for Ridgeway's Pride exotic chess piece, because you know about that crazy buff it received post TU11. There's a stigma that's been associated with the Division 2 for a while, the meta, which prevents so many from being able to express themselves through builds they enjoy making. Also, for this particular build being effective enough to compete in PvP or PvE, well, I have to say that Predator's Legacy gives you exactly what you need. A source of damage other than crit, which is formidable enough to place you in the ranks of any meta DPS build out there. This right here is a reincarnation of a legendary gear set from Division 1. Predator's Mark, the absolute best representation of it so far. A combination of raw weapon damage combined with a lethal bleed, a recipe for DPS you don't want to pass up. Now let's get right into the details. I wanted to share this build with you because I thought it was important. There are so many ways that I would like to deal damage in the DPS area, but it's really hard to diversify because of the meta. And the way to stack damage is mainly based on crit. So for me to make this build and for it to be able to stand against those type of meta builds, it's a really great feeling. Now the only reason I'm using Technician Specialization is because I wanted that extra skill tier just to give my skills a little bit more damage. Now the primary I'm using is the Grudge. I used this Grudge in my cold-blooded build and it worked wonders. It gives you 18% crit chance, crit damage when you kill an enemy with a status effect applied, which is what you're going to be doing the whole time. And the damage to armor is really important. I'm going to show you why when I get to the build. The secondary I'm using is the Carnage. Now this weapon is what I used in my Predator's Mark 3.0 like 6 or 7 months ago. It was really strong then, and for some reason Sadist is insanely strong now. So I said, let me check it out. You know, the Carnage, with it being an LMG, gives you damage to targets out of cover and damage to armor. Two stats that are only found on named items separately. So it's really good when you have these together. Perfect Sadist is the only thing that gives you 25% instead of 20% weapon damage to bleeding enemies. And because it's named after you get 3 kills instead of 4, it applies bleed on hit. But that doesn't matter because with this build, I'm going to be bleeding people all day. So before I describe this build, there's something I want to show you. Because people talk about Predator's Mark builds all the time, but are they really relatable? Because the OG Predator's Mark was known for the potency of its bleed, and every Predator's Mark build we have now is based on the damage you inflict to bleeding targets with the Wicked or the Eclipse Protocol backpack, but not the actual bleed damage itself. So check this out. It's a side-by-side comparison of Ongoing Directive and the Predator's Mark of old. The similarities here are so profound that it makes me believe Massive wanted to bring it back without actually saying it. I mean, both have reload speed and both apply a bleed on hit. My build actually has an advantage in that area because it doesn't take 10 bullets to activate. You can thank Ridgeway's Pride for that. But the 4-piece set bonuses, 50% bleed damage received from the 10 bullets, is still relevant to Ongoing Directive. Look at this backpack. Its unique talent called Trauma Specialist, which increases the duration of your bleed by 50% and increases all bleed damage done by 100%. Do you know what that means? It means that having Trauma Specialist is like having status effects as an attribute rolled on 5 pieces of my gear. For this build, I've rolled status effects everywhere. So I'm doubling down on bleed damage, which is amplifying my bleed damage so that I can compete on the battlefield. Ridgeway's Pride got an absolute amazing buff for this patch, and it's what allows me to have 100% uptime on the bleed. Doesn't matter what I do, the enemy will always be bleeding every time I shoot him. You know how annoying that is? Your armor constantly going down. I mean, a bleed isn't even supposed to affect you this much. The only time you can really get somebody to bleed is when you're using skills, and those have a cooldown. There's no cooldown on the Ridgeway's Pride. Now, the hollow point ammo I get from Rules of Engagement from Ongoing Directive will allow me to inflict more damage. But even without the hollows, the bleed status effect itself is a great distraction. It stops the enemy from running while causing distorted vision. This is psychological warfare, which can sometimes be more effective than a fight itself. But what's also great is that Ridgeway's repairs armor based on the amount of enemies you have bleeding within a 15-meter radius, up to 48%. This lends some aspect of survivability in combat or in any attempt to try and get away when you're in trouble. Now I'm on the hunt for some more Contractor's gloves that already have status effects rolled to them. And I know what you're thinking. Righteous, why are you not using the firm handshakes? You're using an SMG and it has 15% status effects. Well, let me tell you, I'm using an LMG as well. And I did some testing at the gun range. Even without the status effects, with my Contractor's gloves, I'm still doing more damage than the firm handshakes, and that's mainly because of the damage to armor. Just imagine if I had 10% status effects along with this 8% damage to armor. So that's why I said it's important for you to roll damage to armor on your weapons so that you can get the most amount of damage. You want to shred that armor as much as possible. When you shoot somebody when they're bleeding, they just tick like crazy. I mean, I'm already hitting for 85k per bleed tick. So today I'm about to do some crazy farming for some more Contractor gloves, because if I can get another 10% status effects, maybe that 85k could turn into 100k or 92 or something. Before I talk about the skills, I want to tell you about the pistol I'm using. I forgot to mention it, and I think it's fitting for this build. It hits for 550k, and the talent Regicide gives you a 5-meter explosion when you kill an enemy with a headshot, dealing 400% weapon damage and applies bleed to all enemies. This Regulus pistol you can only get from the Iron Horse raid. The skills I'm using, the first one, and I use this mainly for PvP and sometimes for PvE, but for PvE, the first skill I use is the Explosive Seeker Mine because it applies bleed after it detonates on the enemy, and the bleed damage is that of the damage of a skill build. And I only have one skill tier. This is a DPS build. This is why this build is so great and why it's so reminiscent of the Predator's Mark from Division 1, because the bleed is so potent. And this is why you're able to compete with other players using crit builds and compete in PvE and heroic missions. The bleed ticks are what help your DPS along to shred that armor. My second skill, of course I'm going with the Stinger Hive. I mean, was there a question? The Stinger Hive is relentless. Those charges come out so fast, and it's very hard to deal with when there's a group of people fighting and you bleed all those targets. Just imagine bleeding all of those targets, right? Let's say it's 4 enemies and you bleed all of those targets. You're going to gain from Ridgeway's 24% armor per second that you're going to regain just from them bleeding. So this is passive armor repair. It's not armor regen, armor repair. So you get a fat chunk of 24% right away. You know what I'm saying? So there are many different ways that you can play this build. You can run it with Survivalist and utilize the fire grenades because you have status effects. You can use Firewall for more survivability. It's all up to you. But I highly suggest that you roll these pieces this way so you could take full advantage of the bleed potency you get from this build. This is highly suggested from my perspective. I love bleed builds personally, so that's one of the reasons why it's highly suggested that you make this. But just tell me what you think about it, what you would change, or if you think it's viable. And by the way, I made a skill version of this to maximize the bleed even more and utilize ridgeways in a skill build. And trust me, it is not the same. You're going to want to see this build, and if you want to, click this video right here. And I'll see you over there. Until then, be right out.